Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Liturgy of the Chalice. Today we continue our discussion of the Gospel of Mark. We're slowly going through the whole Gospel from beginning until end, picking out the most salient points. So, a very interesting thing happens in Mark 1:35. Jesus teaches us how we should pray. And that is, we should pray in solitude. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. So this tells us about the time of day that's best for prayer and meditation, which is in the morning before sunrise. Usually the sun rises around 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. depending on the time of year and the season. But the idea is to wake up before the sun. And that is considered a sacred time in many spiritual traditions. But for practical purposes, it's when there's no interruptions. Most people are still sleeping at this time, there's less noise, and also there's less subtle disturbances. Just like there's air pollution and water pollution, there is also thought and emotion pollution in our atmosphere. So it's best to wake up before the rise of the sun to pray and to meditate if possible. And he went out to a deserted place. He went somewhere where he could be by himself, where he can have an intimate relationship with the Abba. And of course, later on, I believe in Matthew, there's a lot of teaching about prayer, that it should be done so that people can't hear you. You go into your room to pray. You shouldn't pray loud, like some of the Pharisees do on the street corners, etc. So it's meant to be done privately in such a way that others can't hear, and in such a way where you can gain great focus by getting up before the world wakes up to be with God. Next, we're going to continue our discussion about the healings that Mar Yeshua, the Master Jesus, did. And as we discussed, I believe in our last talk, the reason why Jesus did exorcism, which is a form of spiritual healing, and physical healings, such as we're going to discuss today, was that it showed that God's power was shared by those who had attained the Malkuth. The Malkuth is often translated as kingdom, but really it's kingship or rulership, as we discussed in our last class. It's the sovereignty of God over all creation. And this sovereignty becomes established in the heart of every spiritual seeker as inner guidance and inner rulership and inner prompting of God. And as Jesus went around, such as today's teaching in Mark 1:40-44, Jesus was often moved to heal certain people. His inner guidance, the Malkuth of God that he had attained, guided him as to who he should exorcise or who he should heal. And what did this mean? The exorcisms and healings were displays that were made very apparent as being the beginning of his spiritual ministry in the Gospel of Mark. So far, there are no real teachings for purification of heart yet, other than what we just received on the basics of prayer. So, these divine displays of exorcisms and healings were meant to show the people of Israel that God's Malkuth was present. It was imminent. And that if people could purify their hearts through Torah and the Halakha, or teachings of Mar Yeshua, then they too could establish this Malkuth, this inner guidance within their hearts. Who has the capability of having God's rulership, his sovereignty, his Malkuth, in their hearts? It is the anointed new humanity, or second Adam. Jesus called it the Son of Man, the Baranash in Aramaic. And it meant the Son of Mankind, Messiah. In Talmudic literature, the Son of Man, Messiah, was described as a collective Messiah of anointed, purified spiritual beings. So the Son of Man was conflated into the idea of the Son of David, or the Davidic Messiah. This was done in the Gospels, and the idea of Jesus being the Davidic Messiah may have come from several places, but it definitely, Paul in the epistles, which did come historically before all four canonical Gospels, Paul was the first to overtly call Jesus the Davidic Messiah. And then the other Gospels went with it. But soon in the Gospel of Mark, you'll see that Jesus actually says, "I'm not the Davidic Messiah." I personally do believe that Jesus was of the line of David. So I do believe it's valid to call Jesus the Son of David. But Jesus himself said he did not believe in a Davidic Messiah, though he may have descended through the biological lineage of King David. That is what it seems to mean to me, especially once you get into the different lineages described in both Matthew and Luke. They describe two separate lineages, one going down from Mary and one going down from Joseph. And of course, the historical version would have been the one that goes down from Joseph. Because in Judaic culture, lineage passed to the father, not to the mother's side. But anyhow, Jesus did not believe in a Davidic Messiah. He believed in an anointed new humanity that can purify. We could each purify our souls and our minds one by one, and then we're eligible for spiritual rebirth or spiritual regeneration into this second Adam, this Son of Mankind, collective Messiah, which is a communion of saints. And all of these great saints of the Baranash, the Son of Mankind, collective Messiah, they each share in God's sovereignty. So Jesus did exorcisms and physical healings to demonstrate that he was a Messiah, part of the Son of Mankind collective Messiah, which was described in the book of Daniel, in the intertestamental literature of Enoch, and was further elaborated on in Talmudic literature. So these healings were very important because it showed that God was manifest, clearly present on earth through his prophets and his Tzaddikim, perfected Jewish saints. So Mark 1:40 through 44 describes another healing of Jesus, which demonstrated that he had attained the Malkuth. A leper came to him, begging him, and kneeling, he said to Jesus, "If you choose, you can make me clean." Moved with pity, Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, and said to him, "I do choose. Be made clean." Immediately the leprosy left him, and he was made clean. After sternly warning him, he sent him away at once, saying to him, "See that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded as a testimony to them. So again, we see Jesus has a very profound ability to heal. Historically in Judaism, as we described before, sin was the cause of illness. And ultimately, the conglomeration of many sins can bring us to the point of death. So what Jewish masters, Jewish ravs, what would become Jewish rabbis after the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, they would lead prayer that would invoke God to forgive an ill person or a dying person of their sins. Because once the sin was removed by God, then the person could be healed. So, inherent to the idea of Jesus healing a person, even though it's not discussed yet, inherent in the idea of a physical healing was the idea of forgiveness of sin. And this was revolutionary because it was thought that only God could forgive sin and heal to the mechanism of forgiveness of sin. But what is unsaid here by Jesus, due to his humility, was that perfected beings have the ability of facilitating release of sin for those they feel compassion upon. All great masters can remove negative debt that we all have collected through our wrong thoughts, wrong words, wrong actions. So, when one becomes spiritually purified, spiritually regenerated into the communion of saints, the Baranash, the Son of Mankind collective Messiah, he shares in the sovereignty of God. He is able to heal others as a channel of God's healing grace. What's really interesting here is that Jesus warned the leper not to say anything. Why did Jesus do that? My theory about it, and people can say lots of different things, it wasn't necessarily for secrecy, was it? At least not immediate secrecy in the streets, because Jesus healed this leper in the middle of the streets. Jesus healed others in houses, but others he healed publicly, so that other people can see it. So some people could see and witness these healings, and others could not. Why? And if some people saw him healing, they would obviously talk about it to people they knew. Word spreads fast of such a miraculous healing. But Jesus sternly warned the healed man to not say anything about the healing to anybody. And this was because in Judea, the Judean Pharisees were expecting the Davidic Messiah. So in many of the areas where Jesus traveled and where he did his healings and exorcisms, they were in parts of Judea. And again, the Judean Pharisees expected the Davidic Messiah. The Davidic Messiah is the son of King David, who would be born. He would descend from the clouds, because they conflated the Davidic Messiah with the book of Daniel, which was incorrect. But they expected this Messiah, this son of David, to descend from the clouds, destroy all Roman opposition, and establish God's kingdom on earth. New heavens and new earth. Jesus did not teach the Davidic Messiah, but he understood that people around him thought he was the Davidic Messiah. Jesus taught the Son of Mankind, collective Messiah, which we've already defined. which is the Babylonian messianic expectation of a purified second Adam or second humanity. That is what Jesus taught. He taught the Son of Man, Baranash. But Jesus was aware that some people thought he was the Davidic Messiah. And this is a major problem, because if word got around that they thought Jesus was the Davidic Messiah to the Romans, this would cause major problems for Jesus and his disciples, because the Roman governance would want to execute Jesus. And ultimately, the Roman governor, Pilate, and some of the priestly elite of the Second Temple did succeed in killing Jesus. But the reason why Jesus told him not to tell everybody in town was so that Jesus could stay alive long enough to teach his spiritual message, to plant the seeds for the apostles to carry throughout the world. Jesus was very aware that what he was teaching would be misconstrued as Jesus being the Davidic Messiah in Judea, due to their faith in a Davidic Messiah. Jews expected many kinds of messiahs, not just one. But Jesus was aware that the Roman occupation in Jerusalem and other areas of Judea would hear the people saying, "Oh, he must be the Davidic Messiah that we're expecting. He's going to save Israel." And then the Romans would hunt down Jesus very quickly to prevent a rebellion. So this is precisely why Jesus said, "Don't tell anybody." Because the ones that he wanted to see, that were receptive to his spiritual teachings, would be influenced and see. Jesus knew that he came for a certain population. He came for certain souls, not all souls. Every spiritual master of all tradition has a certain segment of souls to work with. One spiritual path is not sufficient for all beings. And Jesus was aware of this too. Many loved him, and many thought that he was blasphemous. So he came for those that had ears to hear. Mark 2, 3 through 12. Then some people came, bringing to him a paralyzed man, carried by 4 of them. And when they could not bring him to Jesus because of the crowd, they removed the roof above him, and after having dug through it, they let down the mat on which the paralytic lay. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now some of the scribes were sitting there, questioning in their hearts, "Why does this fellow speak in this way? It is blasphemy. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" At once Jesus perceived in his spirit that they were discussing these questions among themselves, and he said to them, "Why do you raise such questions in your hearts? Which is easier, to say to the paralytic, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Stand up and take your mat and walk'? But so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins," he said to the paralytic, "I say to you, stand up, take your mat, and go to your home." And he stood up and immediately took the mat and went out before all of them, so that they were all amazed and glorified God, saying, "We have never seen anything like this." We've already discussed in our prior verse what this means. Jesus said, "So that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. I say to you, stand up and take your mat and go to your home. So Jesus is saying that he, as an individual Son of Man Messiah, part of the whole Son of Mankind collective Messiah, the communion of saints, taught in the book of Daniel, the book of Enoch, and Talmudic literature. An individual Son of Man has the authority of God through the co-sovereignty of the Malkuth to heal. And when you heal somebody, again, in Judean culture, that means that their sins are forgiven. So if you truly forgive somebody their sins, as a Messiah, as an anointed being, part of the communion of saints, then you heal them of whatever disease, mentally, emotionally, physically, they might be suffering from. People in Judea did not understand Jesus. They were expecting a son of David, a Davidic Messiah. And it was clear that they were conflating the idea of the Son of Mankind corporate Messiah or collective Messiah with the Davidic Messiah. They didn't understand what Jesus was teaching. And Jesus all the time, even to his direct disciples, say, you still don't understand what I'm saying? Because there are many different ideas that were floating around Jerusalem and Galilee and in the Babylon diaspora. So there are many different ideas, and many people did not understand that Jesus was actually teaching the Babylonian concept of the Son of Man, the Son of Mankind, collective Messiah. So Jesus was firstborn of this collective Messiah. And he was showing that anybody that becomes like him through Torah, by following his teachings, becomes a son of man or a daughter of mankind, becomes a Sadiq, and shares in the power of God, and is able to heal like Jesus did. For as Jesus said, I do these things, and you will do greater than I. Meaning that it wasn't just Jesus that healed or did exorcisms, but anybody that purifies their heart and truly, sincerely embodies Jesus' halakha and does their best to fulfill Torah, then they share in God's sovereignty. They share in his Malkuth, his kingship, his rulership. And that Malkuth is established in the spiritual heart as inner guidance from God, God directing us as to what we should do. So again, Mark makes it a point to emphasize exorcisms and healings were done immediately after Jesus' 40 days of self-purification and after proclaiming his Basor. Exorcisms, spiritual healings, and healings, physical healings, were done simply with a few words. The first exorcism, or a mere touch. The first physical healings. Exorcisms and healings were an extravagant affair for Jewish religious authorities, their priesthood. But Jesus did this simply without ritual or complicated prayers, which shocked his observers. Jesus' purpose for emphasizing exorcisms and healings at the beginning of his ministry was one, to show that the Malkuth, sovereignty of God, was now on earth, established in the heart of spiritually purified Sadiqim, perfected saints, regenerated humanity. 2, that he and any true spiritual seeker can share in God's Malkuth, sovereignty. And 3, these divine spectacles did draw attention to Jesus so that he could teach his spiritual teachings. There were many teachers around at that time. Many. And they were saying, my way is better, my way is better, my way is faster, my way is more efficient, just like it happens today on the internet. So then as now, there are many teachers and spiritual teachers to pick from. Why should I choose Jesus? And this is something you could ask yourself today, for that matter. Why should I choose Jesus? People of those days may have asked. And the answer was clear. Jesus was not sharing mere book knowledge, but he was a powerful prophet, exorcist, healer, who was a channel of God's power through a mere touch or word. And to this day it's true for all those who have apostolic succession. Jesus wanted to show that God was present. Present for all of us then, as now, and into the future. World without end. Amen.